they're a strong person, it's kind of like telling them that they're weak and they're not as good as them.
And what advice do you have to young girls who are told they run like a girl, kick like a girl, hit like a girl, swim like a girl?
Keep doing it because it's working. If somebody else says that running like a girl or kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing, that's their problem. Because if you're still scoring and you're still getting to the ball on time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. It doesn't matter what they say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl and I swim like a girl and I walk like a girl and I wake up in the morning like a girl because I am a girl. And that's not something that I should be ashamed of. So I'm going to do it anyway. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Why can't run like a girl also mean win the race?
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. I figured we'd show a fun video to get us started. So my name is Mari Nuz Budase. I work at the Women's Resources and Research Center. For my preferred pronouns, I use she and her.
And I'm Joy Evans. I also work at the Women's Resources and Research Center, and my preferred pronouns are she and her or they, them.
So we are really going to try as much as possible to have a workshop and a dialogue today. So I'd love to get us started by just sharing your name, your preferred gender pronouns, and maybe where you work, or if you're a student, maybe your major. To kick us off.
Hi, I'm Erin Pelton. My preferred pronouns are she and her, and I work for student housing.
Elizabeth Ortiz. I use she, her, and hers for pronouns, and I work at the LGBTQIA Research Center.
I'm Colette Antonio. I work in student judicial affairs, and my preferred pronouns are she and her.
Hi, my name is Paige. My preferred pronouns are she and her as well, and I work at undergraduate admissions.
Hi, my name is Lori Trapani, and my preferred are she and her, and I work at financial.
My name is Sarah Sweeney. I work in the College of Agricultural, Environmental Sciences Dean's office. I've never thought about what my preferred pronouns were until right at this moment. So I suppose they are she and her, although you over there don't need me.
Alina Barra, same office, pronouns she and her.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Drexel. I work at the Center for Student Involvement. My preferred gender pronouns are she.
My name is Courtney Francis. I work in the undergraduate student scholarships office, and my preferred pronoun is she and her.
My name is Kara Emery. I'm a postdoc resident over at the counseling services, and my PVP is she and her.
My name is Ashley Chambers Law. I am at the Women's Resources Research Center, and my name is she. My name is Grace Fernandez. I'm at the Biology Academics Research Center, and my preferred gender pronouns are she.
My name is Christina Frost. I am at the Fitness and Wellness Center over at the ARC, and my preferred pronouns are she and her.
I'm Aaron Gomez. I'm at the Moyne Games area with Campus Recreation Union. And I've got to say, I don't have a preference.
Great.
I'm Sophie Kwan, and I work in student housing, and my PGP are she and her.
Thank you.
I'm Mandy Hanna. I work for the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, and my preferred pronouns are she and her.
And then can we maybe start in the back? Would you start us off, Adela? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrew Solis. I work for undergraduate admissions, and my preferred pronouns are he.
My name is Vicky Bennett. I support the vice chancellor.
And then I know a couple of folks just walked in. Would you like to share your name, maybe your department, and your pronouns?
Hi, I'm Tatum Pham. I'm a community counselor, and my preferred pronouns are she, her.
David Quintich, Campus Recreation Union.
David Hennigan, Campus Rec and Unions Building Services as well. I don't have a preference either.
Great.
I'm Andrea Gaitan.
think that's mostly everyone. Before I jumped in, I should have shared, but I think the group did a good job. Preferred gender pronouns are just the third person pronoun we want other people to use when they're talking about us. So I think everybody was able to kind of work that out. So for our workshop today, we have 3 main goals. One is just to raise awareness about sexism, and then for us to share tools of how to confront sexism and how to create a more inclusive campus environment, and then identify ways that we can use our personal influence to create a better community here at UC Davis. So, most of you are really familiar with community agreements, but the second half of our workshop is really going to be about dialogue and sharing. So we have a couple of community agreements, and so I'll run through those really quick. Shared square is both share the air and also share your experiences. So if you find that you're talking a lot, maybe hold back a little bit, let somebody share. If you find that you're feeling kind of shy, maybe take the plunge and share some today. C is for confidentiality. What's said here stays here, but what's learned here can leave here. Respect, treat others as they want to be treated. Speak with I statements, and that'll be really important. Talk about your experience, what you've noticed, what you've perceived, and try not to use like the royal we, like for the entire community. P is for participate and be present, and then T, trust the process and trust the folks in the room.
So we're going to try to just get on the same page to have some common understandings as we're moving forward into the dialogue part. So this next portion, we're going to talk at you just a little bit just to kind of get a shared understanding in the room of the work that we do at the Women's Resources and Research Center. We really focus on gender equity and the difference between gender equality, which a lot of times assumes that there is an equalness between only men and women, isn't what we focus on. What we focus on is gender equity that really pays attention to the differences that in how gender and all the different salient identities that we have in our experiences is impacting our experience of gender. And so thinking about what is going to create gender equity forces us to pay attention to the differences and the nuances and all the ways that we are looking at paying attention to gender equity between all genders, not just an understanding of a binary of men and women, but of gender equity for everyone. Okay. And the mission of the WRC is really to promote gender equity and social justice. And we're doing that in a framework that's informed by the community's perspectives and by the richness of trying to create community empowerment projects, to create a process where folks are naming what's happening and then coming up with the solutions, and having leaders that are informed about what's going on around gender and all the facets of that, that can then promote the value of feminist scholarship and intersectional feminist work, where we're not just coming at it from just the perspective that I hold with the identities that I have, but where we're making progress for the whole community. The WRC is a dynamic organization. We've gone through lots of changes in the last few years, and we do that by collaborating and by continuing to be a reflexive organization where we try things and then we change. And we provide the expertise and advocacy for addressing sexism, transmisogyny, and creating institutional transformation. So we're really excited that you're all here today to think about that with us. So we have kind of 4 areas of our work, and this is just going to quickly, we're happy to talk more about any of those areas, but we do leadership for gender equity, leadership development programs. We do community empowerment programs. We have research support that we do, and we offer scholarships, and we have resources and support. So the other kind of getting on the same page around a definition is we're throwing the word sexism around today. And sexism, as we work with it all the time, is this understanding that it's both systemic and practices that are maintaining patriarchy, and that it's both hegemonic in the understandings of how we move in the world, and it's institutional, and it includes a set of beliefs, and it includes practices that privilege cis men and masculinity. And so a lot of times we like to stop and explain what cisgender means as well. And cisgender is the concept of the sex that you were assigned at birth and the gender that people perceive you to have matching up. So I was assigned the sex of female at birth, and I move in the world as and identify as a woman. So I am a cis woman. I'm not a trans woman. So that's important in terms of our understandings of sexism and how it infiltrates our culture and our work here at UC Davis. So what we would like to do now is we're going to pass out, I can help too. Everyone take one. And we'd like for you to start thinking with us about how sexism shows up at UC Davis. And the chart that you're going to get in front of you is our way of trying to make sense of all of the times when we have people walk through our doors and talk to us about the things that they're experiencing on this campus. This isn't a research chart. This isn't the theory out there in the world. These are real experiences that have walked through the WRC doors and that we've just started charting them. And the thing that is important to note is that they layer. People experience microaggressions every day that are sexist, and then they also interact in a system which has institutionalized sexism. And then they sometimes experience a very acute experience of gendered violence that may happen on campus, it may happen at an off-campus party, it may happen in violence in their family back home, but it impacts when they go to class and what they're thinking about and how they're experiencing the world that day, that week, that month, right? So it stacks on their concurrent experiences, they stack on top of each other, and these are just really based on this last year of things that people have come and talked to us about. So what we want you to do is just challenge yourself to think about experiences of sexism and stories that you've heard. And so if you would be willing, we're going to take a little bit of time. We'd like for you to review the chart and kind of just get a sense of what microaggressions look like, what institutional sexism looks like, and what the gendered violence examples look like. And when you've had a chance to look it over, turn to your neighbor and share a story that either a student has told you or that you've witnessed of a student experiencing sexism. And some of you may be able to rattle off 25 really quickly, but think of it as a story that you're sharing and give time for each person to share their story. And then we'll come back together. So once you get a chance to let that sink in, if you'll turn to your neighbor and take about 6 minutes to each share your story in that time. So we'd love to bring everybody back together. So if we could get everybody to kind of come back together, hopefully you've had a chance to each share a story. And there was a lot of talking in the room. So that says to me that folks were able to start really thinking of at least one very concrete story of sexism that you've either seen a student experience or a student has told you about their experience. But what we wanted to kind of like do a little check-in on, and we can't tell each of the stories, but in thinking about what type of sexism was it? Where was it showing up for the student? And thinking about, was it a microaggression? Was it something that's institutionalized? Or was it a form of gendered violence? And part of this process is the naming of when we're seeing sexism, because so often it is invisibilized, and even institutionalized sexism in the slide here, it just blends in. And it unintentionally worked for us. But truly, we have so much sexism in our day-to-day life that we have to really, even in the WRC, have to be really careful to check internalized sexism and institutionalized sexism in our organization. We're always working against those two things. So if the pairs or groups that got together could just kind of name in one word, which I know is hard to summarize a story, what it was and we'll start with microaggression. So if what you were sharing was a microaggression, could you just share out with the group kind of what was happening? Anyone from over here that had a microaggression?
In one word?
Short.
So a student had experienced being asked about her genitals in a lab, which I think could potentially even be gendered violent. But then what
she wanted to switch lab mates was this, like, you're being too sensitive or too easily offended.
So a lab mate was sexually harassing her.
Sexual harassment, and then the rest of the staff or, faculty being like, you're too sensitive.
Then the next layer of a reaction of that might have been institutional or might have been a micro. Right. This all is intentionally to compound. It doesn't get experienced in isolation. What about other microaggressions that folks talked about on this side of the room?
But I was talking to a student who was an engineering student, a girl, and there were only 2 girls in the class, and she was saying that every time they had assignments, they were pretty much left by themselves, and only the guys in the class were in group. And then they were making jokes about them, so they went and talked to the department chair of engineering. She was saying, for them to actually, acknowledge that they're there as girls. So where that could fit in.
Yeah, I mean, jokes get into, again, coming back to this, you're being too sensitive, but what's happening there is someone's acting out their gender bias stereotype in the classroom, which we tried. Literally invisible in the room. The women students were invisible in that lab.
Why are there only 3 women in an engineering lab? Is it institutional? That's an institutional.
Yep. Other folks on this side of the room that had microaggression examples in the stories? What about this side of the room? Okay, what about some of the institutional examples that y'all talked about? Mm-hmm. So we would say yes, because it's an institution that's built around people not having to care for kids. And the premise of how to access education is an assumption that you don't have to do something with the people in your life. Yeah.
I'm not sure where this would go, but I talked about having women come in and talk about like internalization of good and bad gender roles, like women coming in and saying, I want to be less emotional, I don't want to cry as such. I'm not sure where that would go.
So internalized stereotypes around gender. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, kind of an internalized gendered expectation that shows up in who we asked to put the water on top of the cooler. Was that the example? Yep. Anything else that folks had in their examples? Yeah.
Hearing students talk about difficult exams as using the word rape, like that test, I just got raped by that line.
Yeah. And one of the things that we hear about a lot in the WRC is there's the people who they say it to when they talk about a test like that. And then there's the innocent bystander who walks by when 2 people talk about that test raped me. And if they are walking into the center because something just happened in a sexual assault over the weekend, or if as we know that 1 in 6 college women have experienced a form of sexual assault, it's pretty easy for people who actually have experienced actual sexual assault to overhear the situation that someone just callously uses in their language, yeah. And then how people respond to it. If it's nobody says anything to them, then that's just a kind of like environmental microaggression of, yeah, of course it was a hard test. I hated it too, you know. Any other stories that you want to kind of put out there of things you've seen happen to students or you've had students come and talk to you about? Yeah.
We had students coming in, living survivors. So
Mhm.
why was she drunk,
Mhm.
so blaming the survivor.
Blaming a survivor, and it shows up with the friends of sometimes the person that it happened to and sometimes the person who did it, both. Again, one of the things we watch happen a lot is folks will come into the WRC and then they will tell us that we were the first place where no one said, well, you should just expect it because you were at a party. Of course, you were at the party. You know that's the rapey frat. What were you thinking? And we sometimes are literally the first people that they've talked to that say that's not okay, no matter what it was. If it wasn't okay with you, then it wasn't okay. So this is just to get us going into thinking about how to make sexism visible. And I want to just keep reiterating that in our work that we're doing inside our organizations and in the spaces that students are walking through every day.
Thanks, and I really appreciate that Joy keeps bringing up the piece about the invisibilization, because like we often get questioned of like, why is there a women's center? There's more women staff members on our campus. There's 56% students that are women, and women's representation is part of it, but there's a lot of students of other genders that aren't represented in our numbers, and there's also the psychological, emotional impact, the culture of campus. So what is really important for us that we do with the last 20 minutes is think about what we can do with this information. Because the last thing we want for you is to like hear all these horrible experiences and then say, great, I can do nothing because it's not within my scope, right? We believe that everyone has a role in ending sexism, that everyone can be a powerful change agent. So we have a couple of activities. They'll be really similar. And I just want to be able to get us to think about really specific examples that we can totally manage and then keep kind of growing in terms of scope. So the first one is think about a phrase or a language that you maybe have used often or have used before or have heard that unintentionally perpetuates sexism. And then just think of an alternate, right? An alternative word choice. And I can give an example. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated, right? The first thing that I did right there is exclude anybody who doesn't identify as a lady or a gentleman, right? So now I don't use that phrase anymore. I say, hey folks, a lot, right? So take some minutes, maybe 1 minute to think about an example, and then turn to another partner, another neighbor that you didn't get to talk to, and share what your example is, and maybe even problem solve together. So we'll give you about 5 minutes for that whole process.
I work with these offices, so we meet with a lot of students, and with the online system now we write CS notes. So I met with a student where I thought it was a she, and by the prior me, Joe wrote a note saying, she did this and she said this. I'm like, no, pretty sure it's a she. So then we were talking about after the student left, and we decided we're not going to do he and her anymore. It's going to be the student or the student's name, because we really cannot, we can't assume that we don't know.
Yeah.
Don't like to ask people don't disclose. So we kind of said we're gonna go with Michelle said this or Susan said this, not beyond her. Now that I'm thinking, I'm like, oh my God, how many mistakes in this form?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to repeat back what y'all are saying so it gets captured for the video. The advice here is if we don't know students' pronouns or any person's pronouns, we're not going to use any. So we'll refer to them by their name or maybe the student or the staff member. Can I have a couple of folks share pronouns that are different from she and her? Things that you've heard people use? Yeah.
I learned this earlier. Well, actually, but they were talking about it in one of the presentations earlier. Z and Zer.
Z and Zer, they and them is one that's really common as a singular pronoun on this campus. Cool. How about another example of something that you're going to do differently? Yeah.
When somebody says that they're pregnant or expecting a baby, not to automatically ask, is it a boy or a girl?
That's awesome. So the example there was if someone's pregnant, not assuming that it's going to be one of two genders and only posing a question that's, is the baby going to be a boy or a girl? Great. And how about one more maybe from this side of the room? Yeah.
I just talked about using the term you guys a lot and, as a generic statement. But hey, as you pointed out, ladies and gentlemen, it'd be fairly easy to just say something different.
Awesome. So not using you guys, there's y'all, folks, hey everyone, any of those options. Great. So again, we're going to do a similar activity. And then, oh yes.
Before you move on, what's a suggestion for the
So, I mean, I would answer that in a kind of a complicated way, right? That we believe that people self-define their gender identity, so we can't tell what a baby's gender identity is going to be from looking at their genitalia. And so I don't. Or they kind of push back and I get kind of like, spice things up and say like, oh, what's, the genitalia of your baby? And then that starts to spark for people like, oh, that's weird that we're talking about that. Yeah, that's a good question. Anything else before we keep moving forward? Okay.
I think, like, what are you excited about having a child?
Yeah. A name, yeah. So the suggestions is, what are you excited about? Maybe the baby's name. Cool, yeah. Yep. And the suggestion here was like, is finding out the sex of the baby important? Are you looking to find that out? Okay, great. So the next activity is really about figuring out one thing in your department that you have control over, right? That may be a small change that can make a big difference. So we want you to think about, is there a form, is there a handout where you could change a couple of words that would make a big difference for students? So I can give a quick example. If we have a evaluation and we have demographics information, we wouldn't just say, what is your gender, and only give two options, man and woman, right? So we'll give you a few more minutes to think about, is there a form or a handout or something in your department that could be changed to be more gender inclusive or to not perpetuate sexism? Thank you so much. All right, I'd love to start with this side of the room. Are there any examples that we'd like to share of maybe a change we're going to make in our area? Yeah. Sure.
Something that came to mind was allowing a spot for students to write in their preferred name. The system we used just got rebooted, and so students didn't go in and put it in. It all got wiped. And that way they can get called from the waiting room by whether it's a nickname, whether it's very different than their given name, whatever it might be.
Great. So the suggestion was for their internal department system, they have the names of the students that show up, and making sure there's an opportunity for students to write their preferred name, whatever that might be that they like to be called. Thank you. Any other suggestions? Yeah.
As you mentioned, just simply changing on a questionnaire form for gender, instead of only having two choices, maybe just leaving it blank. And then also, we have complete control over the uniforms our instructors and trainers wear, so making sure everybody's kind of in loose-fitted shirts. We don't need any tight form-fitting shirts, no booty shorts type of thing.
Yeah. Great. So the suggestion again was adjusting the uniform so that they're more maybe gender neutral, not gendered for specific examples. Great. Anything else that we'd like to share?
We were talking about restrooms over here and like in facilities and having gender neutral restrooms.
Great. So the example was gender neutral restrooms for everyone. So we'll move on to the last one. And this one sounds a little bit complicated, but I think that we can do it. What we want you to do is think about, and you have that whole list of examples of sexism in front of you, but we want you to think about that list and how that impacts a student. And then imagine that student coming into your office, to your department, to the services that you provide, and how that might impact their ability to participate or like literally access, enter, or to seek support from your area. And think about what you can do to proactively support them, but also affirm their experiences of sexism. That one feels a little convoluted. How'd that go? Want to share the example?
So if you wanted to use the example of if a student was sexually assaulted over the weekend, so they had experienced gendered violence over the weekend, how would that impact the way that they interact with your office? Whether your office is providing resources, but if you use that specific example, what could you individually and your department do that might change how UC Davis interacts with a student who's experiencing sexism?
Sorry?
Exactly. So if you assume that 1 out of the 6 women-identified folks that come to you have experienced something like sexual assault. What would you do differently if you were keeping that at the forefront of your approach to how you're interacting with students? So we just have a few more minutes that we wanted to come back together with. So if you could finish the thought that you're sharing. And I really appreciate the question that Tiffany just asked about how would you know if someone is experiencing how would you know if someone was just experiencing something like an acute example of gendered violence? And that's really part of this whole process of the making an assumption when you walk out of the doors that our students are having experiences of sexism that impact them every day in a microaggression, multiple paper cuts that just become overwhelming, to the things that we're doing inside our offices that well-intended people have no intention of causing harm to folks, that we have to keep checking our internalized sexism and our institutionalized sexism, all the way to someone experiencing something really acute. So I really appreciate that question. So if we all walk out making the assumption that students are experiencing sexism and swimming in the world we live in, what are we going to do differently that helps them move through this university? And we just wanted to come back and share some of the things that are happening at the WRC so that y'all have this information, because we have resources for students facing sexism. We have a whole series that's how to support a friend, and it's really geared towards our staff use it and other staff use it around campus, of when a student is going through something, the resource is sort of for you to be able to help and support them. And this is the topic list that we have, all specific around abusive relationships, disordered eating, low self-esteem, sexual assault, sexual harassment, stalking, unplanned pregnancy, and we have 3 new ones coming out this fall: depression, suicidal thoughts, and gender transitioning. And then we also have a whole room full of campus and community referrals that you can send folks to North Hall, to our staff, to be able to help them to connect. And we have a library where if someone's dealing with something and they want to understand what this thing is that's feeling so wrong that's going on, and they don't have a word for it, but maybe it's actually gender bias in the classroom, in the STEM classroom, they can come, and some students really want to just read more. And so we have a library that's got amazing resources there. And we also have Jesse Zimbardo, who is the WRC CAN counselor, which is an amazing resource for students to connect and be able to really talk. And Jesse can also refer and give more resources as well.
Are you saying those first ones, are those brochures that you come out?
It's a printed series that the WRC has had for a long time, yeah.
So like, can departments get those?
We're just about to reprint for fall. So we will have them available online, but we also have printed copies, so we're happy to share those.
I'm in the financial aid office, I'm one of the advisors, and I've talked with students that have had many of those situations that they'll confide, and I was just thinking, like we have the CDPP pamphlet, we have a bunch of those on the resource table. But I was thinking if those were brochures, it would be good for us to have those in our drop-in office.
That'd be great. Yeah, and we're happy to share them with you. And I just want to reiterate, the thing for you as staff members that's really helpful about this, it basically tells you here's what not to say when a student has just disclosed that they experienced sexual assault this weekend. Here's what you can say that is really helpful. And here are the places where you can send them to get more support. So, we have created this kind of like, hey, if a roommate walks in, here's how you support your friend. But it works the same for staff.
So we're technically over time. But just a couple more things. There's other ways that you can stay connected with us and that you can get more involved in being a gender equity advocate on this campus. And so we just wanted to make sure you knew about those. You can always request a co-sponsorship from the WRC for work that you're doing that's gender equity related. You can come support our work by offering workshops. We have an empowerment conference coming up in the fall. Semana de la Chicana and the Women of Color Academic Summit in the winter, and then in spring, the Gender Equity Awareness Week. You can also be a WISE mentor if you are in the women in science and engineering field. And you can always come and consult with us if you're working on something or something's coming up in your department, and collaborate with new ideas. We're really open to that. So we just want to make sure you know how to find us, because we are here as a resource for students, but we're here as a resource for staff for exactly this kind of furthering of the work you're doing. We're all trying to make this an inclusive campus environment. So we're really thankful for you being with us today.